now it's manual because of the not translated. Only one, right?
5 panelists and 살짝.
Okay.
살짝 이상하다.
So we do it.
Stand there. Can I stand? Is it okay to stand? Can you get the sign?
Please check if I take two directions. You can tell me. Oh, sorry.
It's fine. It's fine. Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Check, check. Check, check, check. Check 1, 2. 오디오 체크.
Excellencies, distinguished delegates, dear colleagues, welcome back. I hope you've had a good lunch and have enjoyed the many side events that are happening concurrent to the lunch hour. We will now continue with the consideration of agenda item 3 and proceed with the panel discussion on realizing gender equality for women and girls in the thematic area of accountability, participation, and gender-responsive institutions. We will review key issues regarding gender-responsive budgeting, planning, and institutions, as well as strategies to promote women's participation in decision-making and women's leadership across all sectors and at all levels of society, including in the context of peaceful and inclusive societies. The discussion will be moderated by Ms. Chai Chai, Chief of Section Gender Equality and Social Inclusion Section, Social Development Division of ESCAP. I invite Ms. Chai Chai and the panelists to take their seats and for the moderator to introduce the distinguished panelists and initiate the panel discussion. Ms. Chai Chai, the floor is yours.
May I invite all of our distinguished panelists come to sit here? Excellencies, distinguished delegates, it is my great honor to welcome you to this panel discussion on innovative and forward-looking strategies to foster accountable, gender-responsive institutions. As you know, gender-responsive institutions, planning, budgeting, underpin the realization of women's rights across all areas of inclusive and sustainable development. This panel discussion will focus on innovative and forward-looking strategies, encouraging institutions and key stakeholders to implement and strengthen and support changes are needed to achieve gender equality and empowerment of women. In this panel discussion, we hope to cover the rapid digitalization of public administrations, public space, and human interaction, experience of gender mainstreaming, approaches to policies and programs, strengthening leadership, mandate, human and financial resources of national mechanism for gender equality and women's empowerment. Also, the use of gender-responsive planning as an accountability mechanism at both national and local levels of government. Most importantly, any innovative approach in governance and women's leadership in peace and security. So please let me now introduce our panelists who will share their ideas and experience from across the Asia-Pacific region. First, Her Excellency Dr. Masumi Abtekar. She's the Vice President of Women and Family Affairs for Islamic Republic of Iran. She was appointed as Vice President for Women and Family Affairs in 2017. And since she came to the office, she has been promoting a range of measures to support women's economic empowerment, leadership, as well as gender mainstreaming. Our second panelist, Her Excellency Ms. Lee Chung-hook, Minister of Gender Equality and Family, Government of Republic of Korea. Dr. Lee Chung-hook has served also prior to joining the government. She also served as a board member of EcoPeace Asia and Transparency International Korea, and was one of the co-representatives of the Women's Forum for Peace and Diplomacy. Our next panelist, Dr. In Pavi, Minister for Women's Affairs, Royal Government of Cambodia. She has served as the Minister for Women's Affairs of Cambodia since 2004, 15 years already. Minister Pavi has been instrumental in promoting gender equality and gender mainstreaming at national, local, as well as international levels. Let me also introduce one of our women leaders featured on the first day of the conference, Madame Zhang Haidi. She's a vice chair of the State Council Working Committee on Disability in China and a chairperson of China Disabled Persons Federation. Madame Zhang profoundly understands the suffering of persons with disabilities. She uses her position on the National Committee of China's Political Consultative Conference to improve the livelihood of persons with disabilities, including women with disabilities. Finally, Ms. Mosarat Kadim, co-founder and executive director of PAMA, Alumni Trust in Pakistan. She's globally recognized as an expert on prevention and countering of violent extremism through the engagement of women's leadership. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, thank you for joining us in this exciting discussion with our women panelists. So we have about 1 hour and 10 to 20 minutes in total. Let me just also highlight the time constraints. So each panelist will be given about 7 minutes in total, and I will ask each of you 2 questions. Following that, we will invite comments from our member states as well as CSOs. So we want to leave some time for discussion. Okay, so now let me turn to the first panelist, Her Excellency Dr. Masumi Abdekar. Dr. Abdekar, could you highlight strategies and policies that promote gender-responsive institutions, including how gender-responsive planning may be used as an accountability mechanism at both national and local levels of government? I will ask you a second question after this. Yeah.
Thank you. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. It's a pleasure for me to attend this panel, and I'd like to thank ESCAP and also our moderator, Ms. Chai Chai, for this event. Gender equity in the most vast and general terms has been a target for the Islamic Republic of Iran. And in the general terms, justice. One dimension is gender equity, and this is what we've worked on in the past 2 years. Initially, we have a law stipulating that we need to draw up indicators for gender equity in Iran. So based on the research that we had, I think that this is a gender-responsive policy that we took in the Islamic Republic of Iran, and we implemented it. And we have, I think, a valuable experience to share with other countries in this regard. We started by drawing up indicators for gender equity in 7 main areas, including education, health, economic empowerment, sports, social inclusion, political participation, legislation, and security. So and that was a cross-sectoral national process involving the NGOs, involving the private sector, and ultimately these indicators, general indicators, and 176 specific indicators were drawn up involving different sectors. And ultimately we submitted these different indicators to the different government sectors. Alongside that, we started a project, a national project, to develop national plans for the advancement of women at the provincial level on the basis of these indicators. So we went to every province. We had an atlas of the conditions and the status and the statistics of women in every province, because Iran is a very diverse country. Every province has its own local culture. And we came up after a year and a half working at the provincial level with, again, the academia, with the NGOs, with the activists, and the government sectors. We have come up with a national plan, a regional, provincial plan for every province for the advancement of women in the areas of those gender equity indicators. And these plans have been adopted at the highest level of decision-making at the planning committee of every province. We've already finalized 16 out of 31 provinces, and this is an important step forward. We also have a monitoring system. All sectors are obliged to report on these indicators. We will have these indicators and a monitoring system on our website. It will be accessible and transparent for all to see. I think this is an important step forward, and we have a national consensus on this because it has strong legal backing, both in our constitution and our in the Sharia. It's based on the positions and interpretations of the Sharia, also in our constitution and also in our national law. So this is, I think, very important for us, and we're looking forward to a national consultation on these issues where all stakeholders will be involved on gender equity and promotion of gender equity indicators in our country. At the same time, the President Rouhani decreed 2 years ago that in order to have more inclusion of women in decision-making posts and levels, 30% of the top-level decision-making posts in the government have to be allocated to women by the end of his term. That means that we've passed 2 years, and we have 2 years ahead of us. So what we started in the vice presidency was that we started monitoring this. How many women do we have in the government now at top-level decision-making posts? We have generally about 41% of the government in Iran are women, but all different levels. We started initially 2 years ago with 13.6 women at decision-making levels, and through this advocacy and through a scorecard, I think the innovation is the scorecard that we had. We developed a scorecard for every minister and every governor, giving them the number of women that they have appointed to local decision-making bodies or to national decision-making bodies, or as local managers or national managers. And so every minister has a scorecard, every province has a scorecard. We are now ranking the different provinces, and there's a competition on appointing women. After 2 years, from 13.6%, we have now moved to 18.8% of the top-level decision-making posts are given to women. We now have 76 women at the level of deputy ministers, deputy governors. Before, we had practically no women at the governor level. Now we have 10 women in every province as a deputy governor, local governor. So things are changing very rapidly. We're working on training these women so they could perform efficiently, But what's important is that the mentality is changing. In some of these natural disasters that we had, like in Khuzestan, in Karun Governorate, we had a terrible flooding situation 5 or 6 months ago. The local governor there, Ms. Khanfari, she's a woman, and she was very successful, and I visited her governorate, and I spoke with the local people there. They were very happy to have a very strong woman who responded efficiently and swiftly in very difficult situation of flooding at that time.
Thank you. It's wonderful to hear all these measures, not only in developing gender policy, but also through rigorous monitoring system to measure the progress. Indeed, we heard about the quota you have been personally pushing to achieve this 30% in government decision-making and top management. And I was sure under your leadership, it will be achieved by the end of the term. Now, perhaps in less 1 minute, could you share with us, through your personal experience in promoting women's leadership and decision-making, how significant it is in terms of women's leadership in influencing gender equality in general?
It's very important because one of the issues that we have as a religious society is that how do we interpret Islamic and religious ethics in terms of the role of women and gender equity, as you mentioned. And this has transformed after the revolution. The viewpoints are very progressive, but we also have reactionary and backward-looking positions as well. But this policy is bringing about a change in all those views, and they're realizing, even the more conservative sectors of the society, they are understanding that this is a dynamic issue and that we are moving ahead within the framework of the Islamic Sharia, within the framework of our values and norms, which are very, very important. Women are advancing, and views are changing, the mentality is changing, and this has created a lot of hope for our young generation, for our young girls. They see many of these women in powers of position as role models, as women who also have a balance between work and family, because that is also an important issue for us. The paradigm that we follow is a paradigm of women's advancement within the Islamic framework, also paying attention to the family, her role in the family and the importance of the family and family cohesion, which will ultimately, again, support both men and women to perform efficiently in the social and political and economic spheres.
Thank you, Dr. Apteka. It's really indeed very important to have role models in our society, especially for many women and girls who are aspiring to become leaders. Okay, now let me turn to our next panelist, Her Excellency Ms. Lee Jung-hook, Minister of Gender Equality and Family, Republic of Korea. Dr. Oak, could you share experiences and forward-looking strategies with respect to gender-responsive planning and policies in relevant sectors, including technological and digital innovation that create opportunities to engage women's participation in governance and create a more participatory, accountable governance structure? I understand you have a PowerPoint?
Yeah.
Yes.
So thank you for giving this precious opportunity to share our experience, trials and errors, and the hopes and the challenges with all the like-minded colleagues together. So first, our ministry had planted the seed in 1998 after Beijing conference, and it became full-fledged only in 2001. So we are the baby of Beijing conference, I thought. And after that, with the hard collective effort to make this kind of gender mainstreaming to realize, we made some kind of institutional basis like that. So we need sometimes data for for the impact analysis, and also budget. So that was not accomplished in all at once. So first, we legislate the Act for the Data 2007, and the annual Gender Equality Index was started in 2009, and the Impact Assessment 2011, and the budget was started in 2010 and 13, and some kind of a mandatory gender-sensitive education only established in 2019. So it is an ongoing and a continuous journey to fill the gap, whether what we want to achieve. So recently, I will just introduce our this kind of gender mainstream tools. How can it will work effectively in a new field like technology and the innovation sector? So we use the gender assessment tool to penetrate into new challenging area. So recently we have jumped into the medical science, and also women venture entrepreneurship encouraging, and also gaming area, how this kind of assessment index assessment was related with the improvement of this new challenging area. So first, we very concretely monitored the research and development budget, how it effectively used for the really encouraging women venture activities. So every day, every year we monitored, and the budget we have spent, and one is make the budget properly spent. The other way, we want to increase the budget size itself. So I forgot. I will see the exact number of a budget. It is not easy, but we have very actively engaged into increase the size of the budget and also make it relevantly use it. So now it is around 90 Korean billion won. It's approximately $75.2 million in 2018 for this kind of venture funds. And also we encourage the government procurement to buy the women venture product. So now it is the procurement goals is 7.3 trillion Korean won in the $6.2 billion in 2017. So we have increased 8.5 trillion Korean won. It's about 7.2 billion in 2018. So you can catch the how much we endeavor to increase the size of the budget. Also monitor the budget whether it is appropriately used for real women who are in need. And also for that we have we created a report center for unfair practices for women. That was also established. And also for the medical science area, for the drug use and the approval, that was also, we have emphasized a gender balanced approach. So we want to stronger support for clinical tests into diseases with a higher incidence among women, thus raising gender awareness for medicine development policies. And the game industry, it is unregulated, one of the unregulated area. They use the freedom of some kind of gender abuse. So we pay new attention to this neglected area. So we apply the gender impact analysis to create a gender equal gaming culture. So, and we need a very clear and close fact-finding survey on gender discrimination, hatred, gender stereotypes, and the results were translated into related policy to carry out education programs for the industry workers and game users in our effort to create a gender equal game environment. That's the very small examples that we have used gender assessment, the impact in new challenging area, including other existing areas also.
Thank you, Dr. Lee, for bringing us the experience from our case, especially in implementing gender-responsive budgeting and showing us how it impacts the gender equality in various sectors. Now, maybe very briefly, if you could reflect upon the risks associated with technology. We know our case in the front in terms of using technology and in terms of supporting economic growth. It brings both benefits and risks. So how you have addressed the risks or plan to address them, such as through safe digital spaces or bring together diverse partners from public and private sectors to ensure that technology is fostered to encourage more gender equality and empowerment of women. Thank you.
So Korea is famous for some kind of a digital industry in certain way. So we enjoy that kind of usefulness of a new challenging area. But I think the digital industry should be more responsible for dark side or shadowy side of this remnant. So one of those are online sexual violence and also illicit digital images. So this one is, it is very easy to commit the crime, but they didn't realize it is a real crime. So, it is very difficult to delete all those kind of maldoings. So it is big gap between the perpetrating and between some kind of deleting and dealing with those kind of maldoings. So we try to intervene those kind of a big gap. So we thought a single ministry cannot address this issue because it is global. The digital has no frontier. So they escape all kinds of national boundaries of regulations. So first, we collaborated within our national boundaries. So 14 ministries devised a comprehensive measure to prevent digital sex crimes on September 2017. So police and our ministry and the Korea Communication Standards Commission established a unit dedicated to tackling digital sex crimes and is promoting close cooperation among relevant ministries. These efforts have led to a stronger punishment on those distributing illicit images and working on legal reforms to impose a heavier punishment on child pornography-related crimes. The Ministry of Gender Equality and Family has established a Digital Sex Crime Victim Support Center that provides customized support such as content deletion, investigation support, legal and medical assistance. So we made a very cooperative memorandum of understanding with relevant agencies, police, Korea Communication Standards Commission, and the Korea Communication Commission to cooperate to monitor illicit videos and child pornography and provide a swift support for the victims, including content deletion. In addition, we want to collect the wisdom internationally, so we have hosted the international conference sharing policies and measures to tackle digital crimes. And so how could it change our criminal law to enhance the punishment towards the perpetrators, and also we add some kind of education for those who didn't recognize it is a real crime. So that is our new challenging approaches.
Yes. Okay. Thank you, Dr. Lee, for sharing this excellent example and also your insights. Now, let me turn to Dr. Pavi, Minister of Women's Affairs, Royal Government of Cambodia. My first question for you is if you could share your views and experience in terms of both opportunities and challenges in institutionalizing gender mainstreaming approaches in relevant sectors or in all sectors and different parts of government. We know you have been a champion in this area in Cambodia. Thank you, Dr. Pavi.
Thank you, Chai Chai. And good afternoon to Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. I'm very happy to share a little bit of experience of Cambodia here today, especially about institutionalizing gender mainstreaming processes within the government. I think that the Royal Government of Cambodia continue to place a strong commitment, on the advancement of women and gender equality in Cambodia, and especially considering women as the backbone of the social economic development of Cambodia. So Cambodia is also a good example of how high-level commitment, especially from the top level, and inter-ministerial collaboration and partnership with development partners and also civil society are very instrumental to strengthen the institutional gender equality architecture across the government. So we consider, I think that everybody knows that women is not a standalone goal. It's a cross-cutting goal also. We have to put as a stand-alone goal and also a cross-cutting goal. It's a national priority for us. So it's the reason why I think that institutionalizing gender mainstreaming processes is a must. And what are the opportunities? The opportunities, of course, you accelerate the awareness of gender among the leaders within the government. Of course, the government will be a driving force, pulling society, which is quite reluctant for the moment. But however, in 20 years, we did a lot of improvement. And also, you can, as I said, you leverage is a must because you cannot avoid, you have to do. It's a process which is mandatory for all sectors, for all ministries. And also, you leverage gender to the macro level. It's not just a micro level, it's not a micro project, but you have to leverage to the macro level. So you talk about gender in the national development agenda. So this is something which is quite, as I said, it's a must for that. And also the opportunities is you accelerate the process. It's really, it is mandatory, it's accelerate the result coming from this gender mainstreaming. In all sectors, so we have set up an architecture in terms of institutionalizing the gender mainstreaming process. First is to set up the Ministry of Women's Affairs. Second is the National Council for Women's, because it's a cost-cutting. So you have in this National Council for Cambodian Women, you have 24 ministries sitting in the National Council, deciding on the advancement of gender in Cambodia in their sector. After that, you have the working groups. The working group in all 29 ministries, you have, we call the gender mainstreaming action groups. So they are mandated to develop their gender action plan in their own ministries. And then they have also the role to mainstream this gender plan into their national policy and sectoral national policy and sectoral national program. So, and this is at national level, and at sub-national level, we have set up, we call the committee taking care of women and children at sub-national level. So at the provincial level, at the district level, at the commune level, you have this, we call the consultative committee, and you have also the committee deciding to do at the commune level. So this architecture you have to set up in order to ensure that gender are not avoided and we don't miss any point on that. So, and what are the challenges? The challenges is you can ensure the success of your result if you own the process. And the problem for us for the moment is the ownership of different sectoral ministries, because I think that the groups, you know, even there are women, but they don't understand sometimes the gender issues in their own sector. So in order to ensure this ownership, we need to ensure the capacity building. We did a capacity building. We did also a monitoring and evaluation every year of the result of those groups. And also we do also, we call the M&E at the national level. We do the Cambodia gender assessment every 5 years. And this gender assessment will be, in fact, the background for all sectors to look at the performance of their work. Did we move forward or not? What are the challenges? What are the remaining problems? And ownership, the challenge. Also, if you don't have the high-level commitment, you cannot set up this institutionalization process. So you have to get this high-level commitment, and also the commitment from all ministers also. And of course, the challenge also is the coordination, because it's a huge work and we need a lot of coordination. So the process is slow, but you are sure to end to your results.
Thank you, Dr. Pavi, for sharing this wide range of tools and mechanisms you have been using, and also the coordination role of the ministry in promoting gender equality at both micro and macro level across all sectors. Now, maybe very briefly, if you could reflect upon the way forward in Cambodia. Any new strategies to support women's economic empowerment, including entrepreneurship? I know this is an issue close to your heart, also all in leadership and political participation. Any of this area, if you could share. Thank you.
Thank you, Shai Shai. On economic side, I think that Cambodia has one of the highest rate of women, female labor participation. Probably in the region we have one of the highest, yes. So we have to acknowledge this value, this contribution of women. And for the last 20 years, we succeeded also to increase the number of women as leaders in the political sphere, in economic sphere, and also in social sphere. So this is because I think that we have developed an enabling environment for women to reach this level. The way forward, I think that we need, if you talk about professional women, even in political sphere, in economic sphere, in social sphere, professional women need to have a work-life balance. And this is something that we are working on now, how we can ensure a work-life balance in order to encourage more women, more talented women to come in the professional area. And according to the Global Entrepreneurship Index in 2017, Cambodia ranked 114 of 137 globally. The Global Entrepreneurship Index and the private program show that there is a missing role of the government in shaping Cambodia entrepreneurial ecosystem. You talk about the ecosystem. We acknowledge there is a missing role of our government, and it's the reason why the government took several actions, several measures to develop this enabling environment for women, and especially for women entrepreneurs. And for that, we look at, first is the entrepreneurial skill training, and especially we focus on education. Education for women, the access of women to education, tertiary education, and especially on marketable skills, the STEM field. So, Madam, you talk about digital skills. Yes, Cambodia is turning toward the digital skills. And also the entrepreneurial attitudes promotion. So this is something that we are doing a campaign in order to liberate the feeling of being guilty. If you work too much as a woman, you work too much, you feel guilty vis-à-vis your family. So there is a campaign sensitizing our women that you don't feel guilty. It's if you have the choice in your life, you know. And also the entrepreneurial attitude promotion is identifying the successful women, giving the role model for women and how do they succeed in their life. And of course, the business advisory from the government, from the private sector, you know. Okay. So this is what we have done. And also we look at also the access to financial services. So our national bank developed, we call this strategy, the National Financial Inclusion Strategy. This strategy is to increase the access to quality formal financial services, reduce the financial exclusion of women by 50%. So now we have 27% of women accessing to formal. We would like to go, we have 13% of women accessing to formal financial services. So we have to increase to 27%. So 50% increase. And also diversity usage of formal financial services from 59% to 70% by 2025. And also improve the household welfare and economic support growth. So this is our strategy to facilitate the access of women to financial, formal financial services. Yes.
Okay.
And we set up also, through the Ministry of Economy and Finance, we set up also the fund for SMEs.
Yes.
So this is just some example what we are doing now.
Thank you, Dr. Pave, for sharing these exciting new initiatives. We look forward to being engaged in supporting you in the future. Now, let me turn to our next panelist, Madame Zhang Haidi, Vice Chair of the State Council Working Committee and also Chairperson of China Disabled Persons Federation. Madame Zhang, based on your own experience, could you share with us your views on equal participation of women and their role in decision making? Also, could you share the visions you have regarding gender equality and realization of 2030 agenda? Thank you.
Dear Chai Tai, and dear sisters and my friends, good afternoon. I became paralyzed at the age of 5. At that time, I had never dreamed that one day I could have the chance to talk about gender equality like what we are doing here today. Equality is a word, what carries weight, I think. It's a very important. It reflects the pursuit and aspiration of numerous women, and many people have paid various costs for gender equality. I also seek equality and equal rights as others. I always have a confidence in myself and try to turn impossible into possible. As a woman, we need to have an inner power and self-encouragement, so that we can face all difficulties and break obstacles in outside world. Based on the Constitution, China has formulated or revised its laws and regulations, including the law on the protection of persons with disabilities, so that women can participate in social activities more fully, earn public respect, and achieve equality. CDPF has worked actively to promote the employment. employment of persons with disabilities, putting women high on the priority list. Okay. Many women with disabilities have joined in the poverty reduction efforts. Last October, China's central government, the State Council, commended a member of model workers for their poverty reduction actions. Among them were 5 men and 4 women with disabilities. By growing potatoes or making clothes, flowers, and dresses, these women have raised the living conditions of themselves and their families. And they also help their villagers improve their lives. Over the past 30 years, the political and the social position of women with disabilities have been raised. For instance, 6,482 Chinese with disabilities are deputies to People's Congress, or are CPPCC. CPPCC means Chinese People's Political Consultative Conference, members at different levels, and 2,130 of them are women. It's a good news, I think. I have been member of the National Committee or Standing Committee of the CPPCC for 5 consecutive terms, which is the top political advisory body in China. As a woman leader, I have a particular concern for women with disabilities. I have proposed to build a big data system on women with disabilities and give priority to their rehabilitation, education, and employment. I also care about the equality of their life, their marriage and their families. I think marriage means a lot to gender equality. Traditionally, people think that a person with disabilities should lower their expectation for marriage, and women and a woman with a disability should marry someone inferior. But not me. Disability won't make me lower my aspiration for marriage. I'm confident and optimistic. I was sure I would find my Mr. Right. So 37 years ago, I got married, and now my husband is a retired professor at a university. And my husband and I have led a peaceful, happy life. Equality won't come by itself. One obtains equality with her efforts. Their productive rights should also be protected with medical and technological progress. We will see more women with disabilities give birth to their babies, I think.
Madam Zhang or Madam Heidi, everybody knows you as a Heidi, as a national hero, especially as a person with disabilities, how you participate fully in not only your professional development, but also economic, social development in China, and set a role model for all women and girls with disabilities, and demonstrate women in their diversity can contribute to both the development of our society as well as leadership. Now, with this experience, could you share with us your vision in terms of gender equality, women's empowerment, as well as the realization of 2030 agenda for sustainable development?
Okay.
Thank you.
Gender equality, the second question is very good, I think. Gender equality should be a pursuit of all governments, I think. It reflects respect to human being and protection of life. The bias toward women has existed for centuries. Women's contributions to their families are also contributions to the society, I think. What they have done to maintain social stability shall be fully recognized and respected. Efforts should be made to enhance physiological and childbearing protection for women. We need to provide better education to as many women as possible, create more jobs and end in employment discrimination. At the state level, we need to further raise women's political status and reserve posts for women in functional departments of state and social governance. With technological progress, especially with the arrival of digital and smart area, it's possible that women would get further emancipation and equally and sharing will be finally realized, I think.
Thank you, Madam Heidi. Now let me turn to our final panelist, Ms. Musarrat Kadim, co-founder and executive director of Palm Alumni Trust from Pakistan. Ms. Kadim, could you share with us how one or two key challenges to advancing gender equality and empowerment of women have been tackled through your initiatives?
Thank you. Assalamu alaikum and a very good afternoon. To be a last panelist, I think it's a very challenging, it's always very challenging. We just heard about the government initiatives in bringing in gender equality and mainstreaming gender in the policies frameworks. I'm going to take you to another arena, which is basically an area around conflict, peace, and security. I work in an area which is called Khyber Pakhtunkhwa and erstwhile federally administered tribal area that borders Afghanistan. And the challenge over there was that how to bring out women in the community and make them the change agent. How to actually bring out women in those conservative communities and influence their mindset to be the lead, not only as community negotiators, mediators, but peace builders. That was very challenging because we were sort of fighting against the meso-level challenge that every community, I think, poses when it comes to women agency. And usually it is at the meso level where women are located immediately. The challenge of the misuse and misinterpretation of religion to exploit women, the use of culture when it comes to women, the use of tradition and exploiting the women in the name of culture, tradition, and religion. So these were actually the multiple challenges that we really had to address. And on top of that, the one challenge, I think, which is the most I would just say, like one of the foremost, was the women's internalization that they cannot lead when it comes to peace building, that they cannot lead when it comes to influencing a change or transformation. They cannot lead when it comes to actually, building the resilience of the community or resolving the conflicts. So this was this internal this internal challenge within a woman that we had to surpass, that we had to overcome first. So how to actually address this? We really had to work very hard, because I always say that it is so easy to talk about and to address the structural challenges, to talk about the stereotypical thinking and the mindset of the men. But when it comes to the woman herself, that she has to lead, it becomes so difficult. So that was a challenge for us. And the challenge we had to actually overcome was we started speaking to the women about their transformative ability, their leadership instinct that each woman has in herself. Because being a mother, you are already leading somebody. Being a mother, being a wife, you are already actually, a decision maker. So how you are going to actually take that out from the woman herself and influence that process, whether it is at home or in the community, we had to build their confidence in themselves. So the self-reformation, self-realization as a leader was, I think, the most important factor that we had to, of course, not only introduced in the community, but also make the women realize that they could be the most powerful agent of change, and they could be the best change makers when it comes to not only resolving the conflict, building peace at home and in the community, but also leading that change and connecting that change from the local to maybe to the national and later on to the global.
Thank you, Ms. Kadim, for sharing your views in terms of women's contribution to the process of peace building and conflict resolution. Now, given all the work and effort you have made in this area, could you share the impact of this work and all this extraordinary effort in a very difficult circumstance?
Sure. I'll just actually give you an example. Like I said, the women had internalized that they could not do something, they could not do anything when it comes to preventing violent extremism or leading a change or resolving a conflict. But when they are given, you build their capacity, when you build their critical thinking, and when you give them the confidence that, yes, they can make a change and they can make a difference, believe me, I think they are the most effective leaders, not only of the community, but of, I think at the national level as well. So in one of these instances, we always had been faced with suicidal attacks and bomb blasts. And in one of our areas, I'm going to speak to you about my own area. My mother, of course, the area that I belong to is Charsada. It's a city which was from time to time, it was like the bomb blast and suicidal attacks were sort of taking place on the daily basis. And 3 years ago, there was an attack in the school, in the university. And the women who just thought that they could never do anything. So one of our women peace leader, she just told me that when I heard of the attack in the university, I just thought that it is not the task of only the police or the security forces that they have to go there. I have to be the first one to go and help and support not only the victims, but of course the survivors of that incident. I think for me, that was really a moment of pride, because the same woman who never had thought of responding to an incident in this way was really heartening. That the women themselves, they went there. Before that, they actually worked on the early warning. They did tell the security forces in that district that something is going to happen. Nobody responded to it, but when it happened, the women actually were there to respond to it themselves. So the incident had already taken place. But I would just say the only thing which is very important, and especially when I'm speaking to this august house where I think the representatives of many countries are here, please, one thing which is important, that when it comes to women, peace and when it comes to security and peace, do recognize the worth of women, not only as a victim, she is an actor, both contributing to the conflict and preventing the conflict. So please include women in your security policy frameworks. That is so important. Without the inclusion of women in the security policy framework, you will not be able to achieve sustainable peace. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Kadim, for sharing these insights. Indeed, women are active agents in all aspects, including women, peace and security issue. With that, I want to thank all of our panelists for their inspiring interventions. We have a little bit of time left, I think about 10 minutes. Excellencies and distinguished delegates, I have to now open the floor for your questions and comments, brief interventions. I have received a request. I will first call on the delegation of Australia for making your intervention. Is Australia in the room? If not, I will...
Yes.
Yes. Oh,
yes.
Yes. Sorry.
I would first like to acknowledge the Indigenous people of Thailand. I'm very proud that Australia's delegation, appointed by our Minister for Women, the Honourable Maurice Payne, includes 2 Indigenous women from Australia, Dorinda Cox and Florence Drummond, along with multicultural leader Maria Demopoulos. Australia has several government-funded gender-responsive institutions, including the Workplace Gender Equality Agency, the Family Violence Prevention Agency Our Watch, Australia's National Research Organisation for Women's Safety ANROSE, and the eSafety Commissioner. As Sex Discrimination Commissioner, I'm a member of the Australian Human Rights Commission, which undertakes a range of activities of crucial importance to implementing the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action, including conducting 2 major national consultations on gender equality due to report in 2020, a national inquiry into sexual harassment in Australian workplaces, and consultations with Indigenous women and girls to understand their distinct needs. Beijing+25 provides new opportunities to reconnect, to regenerate commitment, and to recognise the value of partners such as the national human rights institutions in advancing gender equality. Thank you.
Thank you, distinguished delegate of Australia, for sharing your experience in promoting gender-responsive institutions. Now, let me invite the delegation of Papua New Guinea for your intervention.
All right, thank you. I just would like to add to our speakers already have spoken. In the recent times, we at least, putting our ladies on certain positions in the districts and up to the province, like a women rep in the District Development Authority, which a lady is represented. And also we have a lady who also, not a lady, but a representative from ladies is also represented at the provincial level. And also we looking at creating reserve seats for our women. It is before legislation and before Parliament that will debate and move it forward to have these seats available in the following next elections. This is some of the things that we do in the areas of women in politics or in leadership or decision making. And also we, the government of Papua New Guinea has put some money into National Development Bank and Microfinance Bank, which enables women in informal sectors or small SME that are doing well with their banking and accountability, transparency, or bookkeepings that looks smart to have access to bank loans and so forth. They can progress this way too. In other areas also we address and we would like to help women can participate. Like I am in our country's national executive meeting, and we make sure that we give equal opportunities to senior positions down the line, so that our female public servants or female who are qualified for the job can be given the opportunity to try out. But this is some of the achievements and some of the progress, but still we are not that far and not that good to come to the level that some of our countries are really having, that enjoying. I mean, our female counterparts enjoying around the world, but you know, culture and some other things are the factors that are set back for our females there. But anyway, we putting aside and we looking forward. Thank you.
Thank you. We're delighted to hear the experience of PNG promoting women's entrepreneurship and leadership, especially it's from a gentleman, and we do need male champions. Okay, now I'd like to call on the delegation of Indonesia.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you, Excellencies, for your comprehensive presentation and innovation. In this regard, allowed me to share some of our initiatives and measures with regard to the implementation of gender mainstreaming. So Indonesia has integrated gender mainstreaming strategy in the long-term and mid-term national development plan, starting from 2000 to 2024. 30 government agencies at the national level and all 34 provinces, including sectoral districts and some villages, have also started to mainstream gender in their respective planning and budgeting. However, there are 7 preconditions to be met by our stakeholders to be able to implement gender mainstreaming at the national and sub-national level. The first one is the high political commitment from the highest level of the government. For instance, with the provision of regulations related to gender mainstreaming. The second one is the availability of policies, including gender-responsive strategic plan. Third one is the availability of planners with gender perspective. The fourth one is the availability of institutional mechanism established at the sectoral bodies such as gender focal point and gender working groups. The fifth one is the availability of tools to conduct gender analysis in planning and budgeting. And the seventh one is the participation of the community and gender statistic and sex disaggregated data. So the Ministry of Women Empowerment and Child Protection, so far we have conduct a lot of training of trainers to facilitators, as well as conduct capacity building to all our stakeholders. Apart from that, at the moment we are also in the process of drafting presidential decree on the acceleration of gender mainstreaming through the gender responsive planning and budgeting. In order to accelerate that, we also appoint what we call the drivers of the gender mainstreaming. They are namely the Ministry of National Planning, Ministry of Finance, Ministry of Home Affairs, Ministry of Women Empowerment and Child Protection, and now a new ministry, which is Ministry of Village Development and Transmigration. In order to help our stakeholders to provide disaggregated data and gender statistics, we also publish what we call the gender profile, so that our stakeholders can start doing the gender analysis in their planning and budgeting. We also now have prepared a guidance for our internal auditors to conduct gender audit for their respective strategic plan. We also work very closely with our CSOs, including religious affairs groups and private sectors and media, to eliminate gender stereotype and discrimination. And one question to the Minister of Gender Equality in Korea. Thank you very much for sharing your initiatives. I would like to know more about the Digital Sex Crime Victim Support Center. So you can elaborate more about this and maybe some examples of the cases that you handle in the center. Thank you.
Thank you, Delegate of Indonesia, for sharing your comprehensive plan, general responsive planning and budgeting. Dr. Lee, are you ready to give a quick response now, or we can also come back to you after giving? Okay, all right, because we also have, okay, we'll come back to you after the other delegations. Okay, Mongolia. Okay, but now may I call on the delegation of China?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And also, I would like to ask Dr. Lee Kung-ok a question. Could you please share us some successful examples to institutionalize gender equality in your country? Thank you.
Okay, now may I call on delegation of Mongolia for your intervention or question?
Thank you very much. Thank you to the panelists for very interesting interventions. And I am very happy to say that Mongolia is not only alone, but together with the countries, is adopting subnational and sectoral gender strategies. So far we have its localization of the national gender program, and so far we have approved already 7, 8 for sectors out of 13 sectors, and that's for justice and home affairs, finance and banking, food, agriculture and light industry, mining and heavy industry, construction and urban development, environment and tourism, labor, social protection sector, which comes population, labor, and social protection, which comes sort of natural for gender issues, and education. And in this year, by the end of this year, we are planning to have sectoral strategies for health, foreign affairs, international relations, and defense. And in 2020, road and transportation and energy sectors. And we also have subnational gender policies and strategies already approved for 17 provinces out of 21. So sharing further experiences with other countries would be very, very important. And I have 2 questions, if I may, you know. You know, for governments, it's easier to adopt and pass bills and programs, but implementation remains an issue, and we adopt in response to our international and other commitments. So could you please share, is there any legal measure taken in your countries to increase the role of the parliamentary oversight? Parliaments in specific situations tend to focus on political and economic issues and social, and including gender, which they regard as a social issue, although it's a macroeconomic issue, they tend to overlook. So is there any? And is there any experience in legalizing or strengthening the role of women MPs caucuses? And the second question is there any comparison and advice you could give us on the strategies addressing gender violence, human dignity violation in the media and digital media? Because it concerns very important issue of freedom of information. It's very complicated issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Mongolia, for sharing your experience, and as well as the questions posed to our panelists. Perhaps we'll come back to our panelists. Before that, I would like to now, I see no more interventions from member states. I would like to give the opportunity to our representative of Civil Society Steering Committee for a brief intervention.
Thank you. Accountability is a state obligation. It is a state's obligation to ensure protection, safety, security, and autonomy of all women human rights defenders, and to act in the interest of women and girls' human rights and gender equality. Women's and girls' participation must be meaningful and visible, particularly for those from marginalized communities. They are not mere beneficiaries. They are contributors and are integral to the accountability processes. We call on member states to implement mechanisms and laws to address the rising violence occurring in diverse ways across the life course of women and girls, affecting them in their multiple identities and roles. Ensure implementation of UNSCR 1325 on women, peace and security and subsequent resolutions. Allocate adequate finance and resources to create and strengthen the gender architecture, including national women's machineries, audit, and human rights institutions. Ensure robust, transparent, participatory, and active monitoring mechanisms from governments at all levels. Civil society must be able to access government policies, data, and decision-making processes. Collect and make publicly available intersectional, gender, and age disaggregated data. Regulate the private sector and enterprises by bringing them under human rights mechanisms. Ensure all national policies are inclusive and non-discriminatory and sensitive to the rights of all to uphold the highest standard of human rights, including SRHR. It is unacceptable that civil society representatives are prevented from attending civil society forums by their own governments. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comment and intervention. Now, I think we have run out of time for this panel, but I want to give, oh, okay. So very quickly, question from okay. Yeah.
Thank you for the opportunity to make a question. I'd like to ask a question to Ms. Zhang Heidi. What plans do you have to promote, particularly for the implementation of the next year, particularly? I wanted to know, please. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for the question. Now, in view of very short time, I would also ask our panelists to give a very brief response. Dr. Lee, can you address the question related to digital media and online violence? And Dr. Aptekar, could you address the question related to women in parliament? And then a specific question for Madame Zhang Heidi.
Okay. So, in our ministry, we set up certain project and program on the monitoring of media. And also we extend our digital literacy education to school and all the ordinary people, because one of our big accomplishment in this year is that we make all government officials and the school students should receive the gender-sensitive, gender-cognitive education. It became mandatory, so that is one of our big accomplishment. And for the digital support center, it is 14 ministries have worked together, especially we did it delete manually. It is a hard work, so we asked the Ministry of Science and Technology to develop some ICT or AI to delete the system. So still it is almost became successful to make AI to delete all the dirty images and the illicit images. So we have a very close cooperation with those periods. And other things for the gender representation, we want to blur the line of gender, the division of labor. So this government has appointed 5 women ministers. So in a so-called important sector, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Ministry of Business and Venture, and the Ministry of Land and Transportation. So Ministry of Education is as a vice prime minister position. So that was the one promising step forward. And also we want to highlight middle and the higher level of decision-making body, especially in government position. And also we apply this rule to business and private sector also. So that is the things we work very hard. But when we emphasize some kinds of women's representation, we should pay due attention not only biological representation, but also social and relevant political representation. Sometimes the biological women may not represent women's need and the political realities. So that is the next concern for us, to be deepened in quality-based women's representation extension.
Thank you, Dr. Lee. And Dr. Aptekar, would you like to address the issue of women in parliament, please?
Yes, about the mechanisms that we used in Iran to ensure more oversight on behalf of the parliament for gender mainstreaming. Since we had a law initially on gender equity, in that law it was stipulated that the parliament had to receive regular reporting on monitoring the status of gender equity and status of the indicators. So this was a monitoring system which we provided the necessary regular reports to the parliament, and this is an ongoing process. And also a gender analysis and gender impact analysis, a GIA, is also underway, which would assist different legislative bodies, including the parliament, to have the necessary oversight on this process and the trends that are proceeding. So, and also what is important is that all these processes are transparent. The reporting will be provided access to all the public on our website, and so everyone will be informed about the results, the pace, the analysis. I think transparency and accountability are very strong monitoring tools, and so I hope that we'll be able to achieve results, and our policies are all result-based. We're looking for change and results in all these different areas.
Thank you, Dr. Aptekar. And I would also like to give...
if I may just...
Yes, Madam Heidi, just want to mention...
I just would like to say that in Cambodia, we have the same process from the parliament. We have a commission supervising gender issues. It is inside with health, education, and we have also gender issues. So we have an annual report to the commission on the advancement of women in our country. And also, they can also enforce, the advancement of this agenda through the adoption of the budget, because the budget is needed to allow the implementation of activities. And in that case, at the end of the year, we are going and we lobby, we advocate, we are not lobbying, we advocate with this commission to help us to increase or to review certain point in the budget. Related to the violence and what is the contribution of the media, we have discussed two weeks ago in Nairobi for the ICPD, the Population Summit. We talk about the role of the media is like a sword with double edge. When they are reporting well, it's okay, but when they are not reporting well, they blame on the victims, and this is the problem for violence on women. So we did in Cambodia, we signed a code of conduct with the Club of Journalists, and we organized training with those journalists who are dealing with social issues, and especially related to the reporting of domestic violence or rape or trafficking. And I discovered also during my attendance in Nairobi a few weeks ago that there is also a UN agency organizing also training for journalists on those issues in order for them to understand and how do they report, not filming, not showing the face of the victim, etc. There are some ethical issues. So I think that we can talk maybe later on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Pavi. Just now, Madame Heidi told me in view of, she understands the time constraint. She's happy to provide the information to our key representative after the panel session. Thank you, Madame Heidi. Okay, so this concludes this panel session. I want to thank all of you for engaging in this dialogue with our women leaders. And special thanks to all of our panelists for your contribution and inspiring interventions. Thank you. Let's give them applause.
Shall I inform them? Ladies and gentlemen, we would like to just inform you the next panel will start shortly on gender and climate change and resilience building.
Check one.
Just clarify the format. Ladies and gentlemen, can we please take our seats for the start of the next and final panel for the day? Excellencies, distinguished delegates, dear colleagues, we will now proceed with our fourth and final panel discussion today entitled Realizing Gender Equality for Women and Girls in the thematic area of environmental conservation, climate action, and resilience building. We will review key issues, strategies, and good practices to integrate gender perspectives in policies and programs related to environmental conservation, climate action, climate resilience, and disaster risk reduction, as well as women's participation in these areas. The discussion will be moderated by Ms. Anna Karen Jetfors, Deputy Regional Director, UN Women Regional Office for Asia and the Pacific. Thank you, Anna, and the panelists, if they could take their seats, and for the moderator to introduce the distinguished panelists and initiate the panel discussion. Anna, the floor is yours.
Your Excellencies, distinguished delegates, dear friends and partners from civil society, UN entities, and all other stakeholders. On behalf of UN Women, it really is my honor to have the chance to moderate this discussion. Before I introduce our distinguished panel this afternoon, I just wanted to provide a brief overview and introduction of why this is such an important moment to discuss issues around environmental conservation, climate action, and resilience building. Because over the past 50 years, the average global temperature has increased at the fastest rate in recorded history. And this trend is accelerating, according to experts. And we know that in all countries, it is precisely the segments of the population who are poor, who are the most reliant on natural resources for their livelihoods, who have the least capacity to respond, who are affected most. And we know that in all countries, these often are the women and girls. We know that women are and can be powerful agents of change because they possess individually and collectively specific knowledge, skills, and experiences that are critical for effective climate change adaptation and mitigation. Even so, they are largely underrepresented in decision-making at all levels. And this needs to be urgently addressed. And understanding the gendered impact of climate change is key for sustainable development, and it's key for meeting our goals on gender equality and women's empowerment. So very briefly, just to highlight what some of these impacts are. We know that in every disaster that we've seen in our region, women and girls have accounted for more than 50% of the mortality, in some as high as 90%. And we also know that women face increased economic hardship and poverty as a result of climate change, due to the destruction of livelihoods and due to the reduced time for income generation that comes because of the deeply gendered division of labor and women's burden of unpaid care work. We see, for example, that where we have disasters and where food becomes scarce, it also affects the distribution of resources within households, with men and boys often favored over the needs of women and girls. So these are just some of the examples why we need to prioritize and why we need to address these gender dimensions of climate change and of disasters. But when we look at the numbers, unfortunately, we have a long way to go. We see, for example, that even though women are responsible for collecting water for 80% of households, they represent only 19% of senior management in natural hydrometeorological services, and only 35% of environment ministries even have gender focal points. So I just want to very briefly highlight a couple of statistics and a couple of recommendations that come out of a publication that we have done together with the ADB, and these speak directly to the issues that we will address with the panel this afternoon. First, we must integrate gender equality into global, regional, and national DRR and climate change policies. We have to invest much more in data and evidence to support planning, to support monitoring, and to support implementation of gender-responsive climate action. We have to support women's capacity to prevent, prepare for, and recover from natural hazards in a changing climate. We have to integrate gender into climate finance. And last but not least, we have to ensure that women benefit from the expansion of green jobs. So these are also some of the priorities that we are addressing through a UN Environment, UN Women Sweden program here in this region that is looking to ensure that climate change and DRR policies and programs are indeed gender responsive. And we're also quite excited to have a number of other emerging partnerships in this area, including with UNDP, UN Environment, ADB, and others. These are indeed some of the issues. I won't hold you between you and our distinguished panel here. So without further ado, please allow me to introduce them. First, we have Mr. Misan R. Khan, who is the Deputy Director of International Center for Climate Change and Development, and a Program Director of LDC University's Consortium on Climate Change. Welcome, Mr. Khan. And he has been a climate change negotiator with the Bangladesh delegation since 2001, and he will bring really the achievements on how do we mainstream gender under the UN FCCC process, so important. Secondly, we have Ms. Amelia M. Nairoba, who is the Acting Principal Research Officer at the Research Policy and Monitoring Unit at the Department for Women, Ministry of Women, Children and Poverty Alleviation in Fiji. And she's been very active in steering the development of a national plan to implement the Gender and Statistics Roadmap in Fiji, and has coordinated this work with representatives from various data-producing bodies in her country. Next in line, we have Mr. Joe Mari S. Francisco, who is a Development Management Officer of the Climate Change Commission of the Philippines. And he is the Commission's technical focal point on gender and development, national climate expenditure, and monitoring of a number of climate change-related provisions. And he will share his experiences from the Philippines. We then have Ms. Seblewongsel Negusi, who's a gender and social specialist of the Division of Country Programming of the Green Climate Fund based in the Republic of Korea. And she has more than 20 years experience on gender, both internationally and nationally, and now working on programs in agriculture, food security, good governance, and with the private sector to mainstream gender equality. Last but certainly not least, Ms. Nguyen Ngoc Lee, who is the director at the Center for Environment and Community Research in Vietnam. She's part of a climate change working group that UN Women works with to expand women's leadership and women's participation in climate change action and disaster risk reduction. And she is a strong advocate for participatory and inclusive environmental governance and climate change action. She will bring particularly her experiences from Vietnam. So I think it's really great that we have such a diverse panel. We have researchers, negotiators, funding agencies, government officials, civil society, to really unpack these linkages between gender equality, climate change, and resilience building. So we want to keep this forward-looking. It's about highlighting opportunities where there's scope for innovation, where we see scope for good practice, how we can bring gender into the data side, into the coordination mechanisms, into policies and programming, Let's get started to see where we have some of these good practices. So starting with you, perhaps, Mr. Khan, based on your experiences from negotiating on climate change with Bangladesh, where do you see good practices for mainstreaming gender? What have we learned so far about this process and what works?
Thank you, Anna. I'm happy to be here. And I feel better being sandwiched by 5 ladies.
Oh.
No, 4 ladies. And that should be, because for centuries, we male have dominated women. Now it's time for them to dominate a little us. So this, as you have heard from Anna, that I am a long-time negotiator, but first and foremost, I am a university professor for long years. But I work with the government in the UNFCCC process. For the last 18 years, I have been attending climate negotiations. So at the beginning of my intervention, I will highlight a little on, though you know, but just as bullet points, I will highlight the progress at the UNFCCC. You know, the mainstreaming of gender started with the Lima work program on gender, back in 2014, and then under it at COP23 in Bonn, we have adopted the Gender Action Plan. And that GAP was initiated with 3 kind of purposes. To have meaningful participation, equal and meaningful participation, to promote gender-sensitive climate policy, and finally, to mainstream gender in all the UNFCCC process. And that GAP, has got also 5 priorities, but the foremost and number 1 is the capacity building and knowledge sharing. Then coherence is an issue in all the international bureaucratic processes, because many, many different organizations, when some agenda comes as the agenda, for example, the agenda, then any and every agency wants to have a kind of contribution to it, and that happens. That is why we also need to have better coherence, and UNFCCC process is trying to do that. And COP25, where after getting back from here, I have to fly to Madrid, will review this gap, and there, I think I am a negotiator also on behalf of the G77, LDCs and SITs, so on behalf of them, but this is my personal opinion, that we can highlight the following issues. COP25 is supposed to review this gap, and after 2023, the constituted bodies also have taken initiative to mainstream their kind of composition, to engender their composition. You might have seen the report that of those 11 or 12 bodies which considered this participation of women in their membership, Adaptation Committee and the PCCB, with which I'm involved, Parish Committee and Capacity Building, have got the highest representation of women, about 40%. And also, in the Paris Agreement preamble and also in the decision process, there is reference to gender. Now, at this COP, we can have, I think, as an individual negotiator, and I will intervene on the points which I can share, some of them. For example, this LWPG and GAP must continue. GAP must continue under LPWG, and then we can suggest for the parties to adopt an enhanced 5-year GAP with kind of a provision on midterm review. And then also we will advocate as a negotiator to align this GAP process with the NDCs, for example. About 186 countries have submitted the NDCs, and now all the developing countries are on track to develop their NAPs, National Adaptation Plans. So, and we will have global stock take soon. Now transparency framework is being developed. So with all these processes, including the Sendai framework and the SDGs, so we need to align this engendering process with all these international negotiation processes and the documents. This is one thing. And then we have the representative from GCF. We will request the GCF and the GEF to be more gender responsive, and so that once we see the reports, we can vouch for them that yes, they are becoming gender responsive. So these are the main, some of the suggestions that I want. And also funding. In all sessions, you might have heard that funding is inadequate, but there is opportunity in the sense that there is enough sensitization now, good stock of sensitization on which we can bank on, we can build on, and there is not much money, but little money around to enhance participation of women delegates in the UNFCCC process, but funding will be needed more. So these are some of the opportunities.
Wonderful, and it's great to see that so much has happened, because I know that it was only in COP22 in 2016 that the decision on gender and climate change was mandated the development of a gender action plan. So it's really great to see the opportunities already from gender mainstream in this space. I want to turn now to the important issue of data, which you also touched upon. And Ms. Nevroba, perhaps if you can share with us your experience on this specific roadmap on gender statistics. How do you see it being able to support countries, really make a difference in the lives of women and girls? And specifically, why did you choose to measure these connections between gender and the environment?
Thank you, Hannah. Just before I'll provide our intervention, we wish to thank the organizers, UN Women and ESCAP, on behalf of the Pacific Island countries, in recognizing our existence and being part of this forum, in seeing the critical issues that pertaining to women and girls in terms of when it comes to climate change and the crisis that we get to undertake as well. So, and also on behalf of the Fijian government as well, we wish to thank you for providing us this opportunity. I'm sure that first of all, we wish to thank the UN Women and also our partner with SPC, who have recognized also the greatest, we would say, biggest gap in the Pacific, and specifically in Fiji, in terms of measuring the gaps and the gender issues, the issues that women get to face in terms of crisis, in terms of climate change. And one of the recognition of what the framework has in place is that it will be able to provide a framework to be able to support the Pacific statistical systems, to be able to generate equality, relevant, timely data that meets users' needs to achieve gender equality in the Pacific. So really, for Fiji, I specifically speak on our behalf, is that this is one of the areas that, we know the issues that women go through. It's nothing new to all of us, but it's basically to be able to measure what are the indicators that be able to give a clear status of women who have been displaced, who have, not only it's not about being displaced, it's about the issues, the gender critical issues that women and girls go through in terms of being faced with not being provided access to proper quality education, and also talking about displacements. Given in the Pacific and also in Fiji, we are really rooted with our culture and our traditions, and when we get to live from where we were, we leave behind what, and also looking at what we were known in terms of our values and our cultures, and also the resources that we get to rely on. Our women, our rural women, they get to rely on in terms of coming up with their livelihoods, the handicrafts and all these things. So basically, what we get to envisage also, and I'm sure this framework that we currently working in collaboration with other Pacific Island countries, with UN Women, it's still work in progress, and we hope to to get to finalize this and having it supported by our respective governments, head of governments, in terms of ensuring that we have something that in place that'll be able to measure the issues of women in terms of climate change crisis. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you for highlighting the importance of statistical systems and data to really measure these gendered impacts of heightening inequalities. And I think this is also what our program Women Count is also about, to enhancing how data is not just created, but how it is accessed and how it is used to inform policymaking. So thank you so much. I want to elaborate a little bit further perhaps on some of the institutional mechanisms around coordination. I think this is one issue where the Philippines has come quite a long way. Can you share with us what were some of the success factors on your side in terms of how we can have these mechanisms, coordination mechanisms, to make sure that our climate policies, climate action is gender responsive? How did you go about it in the Philippines?
Good afternoon. First of all, I want to express our appreciation to the organizers for convening this important event and to share our experiences in the Philippines. I would like to encompass it with some of our strategies. First, in the enabling policies, institutional mechanisms, and capacity building initiatives. For enabling policies, in 2009, it is what we consider in the Philippines as a landmark year for gender and climate change. It was in that year when two critical legislation were passed directing how government should address gender and climate change issues in the Philippines. First is the Magna Carta of Women, which spells out comprehensive women's rights that seeks not just to eliminate discrimination, but also promotes and fulfills the rights of women, which further strengthen and complements the Climate Change Act. And again, the Philippines Climate Change Act of 2009, as amended, declared as a policy of the state to incorporate gender-sensitive, pro-children, and pro-poor perspective in all climate change and renewable energy efforts, plans, and government. To further operationalize these two legislations, this year in January, we adopted a commission resolution. It is like an executive order in the Philippines in which the Climate Change Commission, under the Office of the President, resolved to strengthen gender-based approaches in the formulation and implementation of climate policies, programs, plans, projects, and activities in the country, including the generation of sex-aggregated data and the conduct of gender analysis. Moreover, it resolved to coordinate with agencies concerned in promulgating policies, directives, and initiatives supportive of the collaborative approaches to accomplish the objective of gender and climate change scenario in the country. Next is the institutional mechanism. To ensure a convergence of climate change and gender equality to our government, the Climate Change Commission includes and ensures the involvement of in the planning and decision-making of the Philippine Commission on Women on our climate actions. We establish interagency mechanisms like the Climate Change Advisory Board, in which the PCW sits as one of the members. And we also recognize that climate action is not as well, contains more of a cross-cutting issues, not only gender. That is why we also include youth representative from the National Youth Commission, in a CSO representative, an academe, and a business representative. And also, as we develop our nationally determined contribution, we establish a technical working group in which the Philippine Commission on Women is part of the member, and we are working together to ensure that our climate adaptation strategies and mitigation options are gender responsive. We also have a technical working group on the Green Jobs Assessment and Certification Standards under the Philippines Green Jobs Act. And lastly, we have a People Survival Fund. It is a mechanism which provided a supplementary fund worth of an estimate $20 million US dollars to provide local communities and local government units support to their climate change adaptation projects, while recognizing differentiated impacts of climate change to various gender groups. And lastly, We are now in the process of reevaluating our Memorandum of Understanding with the Philippine Commission on Women. This Memorandum of Understanding aims to reinforce and to link both agencies' action towards the achievement of SDG Goals 5 and SDG Goals 13. This memorandum, as I have said, is currently being reviewed based on our lessons and experiences for the past year. And lastly, on the strategies is the continuous capacity building initiatives. We recognize the importance of building the capacity of our climate change personnel in gender mainstreaming. That is why, since the establishment of the Climate Change Commission, we strive to conduct capacity building on gender mainstreaming, like a gender-sensitive training, gender and climate change 101, GAD planning and budgeting. And lastly, last quarter, we just conducted an NDC Gender Inception Workshop to further sensitize our stakeholders in terms of mainstreaming gender and in our climate action as reflected in the NDC. Thank you.
Wonderful, thank you so much. And it's really great to hear how you are bringing different sectors together through these technical working groups and other ways, because indeed we see often that gender equality actors may not always interact at the policy level with environmental actors and vice versa. So great examples from the Philippines, thank you. I will turn now to Ms. Nagisi. Now the Green Climate Fund has placed gender equality really as a core element now of its programming architecture. From your perspective, how does the incorporation of a gender perspective lead to more relevant and effective interventions?
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure for me to be here and then to share some of the early learnings from the Green Climate Fund and how we conduct the gender work. The Green Climate Fund is a fund which is created to support the efforts of developing countries to respond to the challenges of climate change. GCF helps developing countries limit or reduce their greenhouse gas emissions and adapt to climate change. While it does that, it has also comes with certain obligations, if you like. The GCF has its governing instruments, which requires it to be gender sensitive and use a gender sensitive approach to all its investments. And it has a gender policy and gender action plan, which has been recently updated. And this policy recognizes that gender relations, roles, and responsibilities have important influences on women's and men's access to and control over decisions, assets, resources, information, and knowledge. It also recognizes that the impacts of climate change can exacerbate gender inequalities, but it also recognizes that climate change initiatives are much more sustainable, equitable, and more likely to achieve their objectives when gender equality and women's empowerment considerations are integrated into the design and implementation of projects or programs, if you like. So the GCF then applies this gender policy both looking at its internal practices as well as its external engagements with the various actors. This means that in all the mitigation projects and adaptation projects, we will look at gender equality issues as a core element, and it will also be considered by all the private sector or public sector investments that come to us for financing. So it is a requirement for us that all interventions, all projects that come to us, whether they are from private public sector or whether they are focused on adaptation and mitigation interventions, look at to provide us with a gender assessment or analysis in the initial stages, and also develop, based on those assessments, gender action plans. So in the Pacifics and in the Asian Pacific areas, all the projects that we have received so far have provided us with all the gender analysis and assessments. And with an exception of two, which was in the earlier stages of the fund, all others have provided us with gender action plans. So we expect some things to be done on the ground. But before we go into the funding proposals, there are certain requirements at the entry level. To become accredited, entities will have to go through some other obligations, that they will have to commit to having a gender policy that speaks to or complies with the requirements of our gender policy. So in their internal practices, accredited entities will have to show how they are equitable, providing opportunities, but also in the interventions that they will come up with when they ask for financing and the funding proposals. They will have the capacities and competencies in place to actually implement the action plans. So the fund also recognizes that not all accredited entities have the capacities, because we have national accredited entities, we have international, we have MDBs and all that. We recognize that there are capacity limitations, and so there is, for accreditation, to meet the accreditation requirements, there are finances available to ready them or to support them in developing the required documents and the required competencies. But once that is fulfilled, because they will have to fulfill that requirement to be able to present us with funding proposals, once they come with funding proposals to the fund, then they will have to undertake gender analysis and develop a gender action plan that speaks to the sector that they are engaged in and that speaks to the context that they are in which they are implementing that project. Again, the fund recognized that there are capacity limitations. We are very cognizant of the challenges that exist in countries and institutions. So there is a possibility to tap into preparatory finance to be able to develop, relevant, including all the things that were mentioned here, relevant interventions that do actually make change happen on the ground for our communities, and particularly for the vulnerable communities that will be identified. So there is constant support being supported at every level to make sure that we are not just ticking the box, but actually doing some work on the ground. While I say this at accreditation and funding proposals, we also look at the national adaptation plans, because I think all emanates from policies that exist, and we would like to see upcoming policies to include elements of that. So we do look at the national adaptation plans to see if they actually address gender equality. But the opportunity for me then is how this accountability rests at different levels, how it integrates, provides opportunities for communities and particularly women in their stakeholder engagements when they're developing the assessments, how the grievance mechanisms that we set responds to the particular situation of women to be able to address those issues, and how violence against women has been at the forefront, and with disasters there are increased violence that happens, and how it responds to those. So the assessments and action plans that we require are based on how communities feel they should be addressed and how they see those translated into their action plans.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for really walking the talk, not just in the accreditation, but also in the actual implementation. We do know, of course, from experience that it doesn't happen on its own. And so when you have gender neutral, what you think gender neutral interventions that actually can exacerbate existing inequality. So really looking at it throughout the interventions from design and through to the monitoring is indeed a very important step. I'll turn to you now, Ms. Lee. From your experiences in Vietnam, looking particularly at expanding women's leadership and women's participation in climate change action and DRR, if you can just tell us, why do you think that women's economic empowerment in particular is so important also when it comes to environmental conservation and resilience building? Ms. Lee.
Thank you, Jan, and hello to everybody. I'm from NGO, so I'm very humbled to be here and to have this opportunity to speak on some example from Vietnam. Women participation and leadership in climate change actions proved to be strong win-win approach. And I would like to take this opportunity to provide you with an example from our project in Vietnam, women empowerment in waste value chain, which help women in income generation, environmental improvement, and reduction of greenhouse gases. But first, let me explain a little bit about situation in Vietnam. The country produces around 80,000 tons of domestic waste every day. About 80% of this waste is dumped in landfill. And we know that unhygienic landfills cause serious environmental issues and also a source of emission of CO2 and methane. So collection and recycling some recyclable wastes is one way to reduce waste to landfill. This work is often carried out by women of household and informal women collectors on streets and scavengers. Almost 90% of informal collectors are women. In Hanoi only, we estimate about 6,000 women working in this sector. So how can we empower these women? So our project is empowering women in pioneers community participation in municipal solid waste management. We implement a women-led recycling program at communities, and we work with women associations to spearhead it, a source segregation scheme, and women group take this recyclable waste to sell to street collectors. So women union actually make contract to street collectors. Normally they don't have any contract, but we make contract with street women collectors and sell this recyclable waste to them, and they sell to recycling centers. So after 6 of trial, women groups make the earning about 100 million Vietnamese dong. It is the equivalent of $5,000 US. And women collectors have increased their incomes of about 15%, about like $250 a month. So this example shine a light on how empowering women in waste sector can help creating jobs, generate incomes to help their families, help municipality to reduce costs on waste management, and improve environment and social effectiveness. But at the same time, we also realize that informal street collectors face a lot of challenges. They work more hours in poor and unsanitary conditions. They make lower income than men in the same sector. They don't have access to health insurance. They don't have any kind of social protection. They have limited the minimal power in negotiation for pricing. And they face huge discrimination in society and at home because this job has been considered as very, very dirty work. So and normally their work is not acknowledged by society and sometimes by the government. So we strongly recommend that policies to formalize the role of women on waste management and eliminate the stigma on them need to be in place. And local agencies and governments should build technical and leadership skills for women to help them to access information, training, and education. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that example of waste management. And just to imagine that such a thing can be both a source of income and livelihoods and empowerment for women while also helping promote municipal. One last round of question. I do know we started a bit late, but I would like also to allow the floor to come with their questions and comments. So perhaps there's one more round of questions then. If I can ask you, Mr. Francisco, we know that when disaster strikes, women are the first responders. And yet that response is often not recognized in decision-making. So how do you think governments can really help empower women in resilience building and disaster response? What would be your top recommendations for governments in this regard?
Well, in the Philippines, we all know it, and it is a common knowledge that the Philippines is among the most vulnerable countries on extreme weather events related to climate change by virtue of its geographic location and archipelagic in nature. So first, what the Philippine government did is to enact policies and enabling laws. As what I mentioned is the Philippine government enacted the Magna Carta on Women, the Philippine Disaster Risk Reduction and Management Act in 2010, and the Climate Change Action Act in 2009. So what currently what the government is doing is to ensure that these three laws harmonize with each other, and there is an incorporation of these laws in recognizing the protection of women's rights during disaster emergencies, and also highlighted role of women in environmental conservation, including their access, management, and decision-making over natural resources. Another thing is a system-wide programs and projects that builds good practice that must be implemented down from the national to community levels. In the case of our action, as we reported in the Beijing +25 review, we cited that education and awareness level from national to community levels by different concerned government agencies like forest and land restoration towards sustainable forest resource management provided capacity to local women forest rangers, and also our environment ministry provided also a capacity building on the geological risk and knowledge exchange, wherein local community groups and women groups were trained how to read geological hazard maps, especially in pre-disasters. And during the immediate aftermath of extreme weather events such as what happened during the Super Typhoon Haiyan, provision of maximum care, assistance, and service to disaster-affected individuals and family, to implement emergency rehabilitation activities, food and cash assistance and disaster volunteer work, disaster response skills training, and educational assistance for children, along with the orientation on different social protection laws and services such as HIV/AIDS, menopause to vow or violence against women, and child trafficking, especially that it is expected that vow and child trafficking will be on the rise after every major disaster, and complementary efforts with the civil society and humanitarian groups to facilitate access to clean energy and other resources. Another thing is to facilitate the restoration of heavily damaged natural resources and asset base. We recognize women's leadership in management of rehabilitation of coral reefs and seagrass communities to ensure fishing grounds for women, and ensuring participation of women in conservation and management of these natural habitats, including a women-managed marine and coastal areas. And there are some case studies in the Philippines that it is provided a positive impacts on environment and social aspects. And lastly, I'd just like to highlight that during the last board meeting in the Green Climate Fund, the GCF board approved our first project, the multi-hazard impact-based and early warning system, in which it provided a local community touch on early warning system. And part of that project is to establish a gender action plan to ensure that women on the ground, especially in the grassroots level, have a clear understanding on how to interpret early warning and impact-based approaches during pre-disasters, post-disasters, and during the disasters area. So yeah, great.
Thank you so much for highlighting in two new areas I think that we haven't heard until now, very important, both links to violence against women and how the risk of violence increases following a disaster. We see it time and time again. And of course also the importance of making sure that women are part of early warning systems and processes which they may not otherwise have access to the information to make informed choices and protect themselves and their families. Thank you so much for that. So Ms. Negesi, then, we've heard already that women tend to rely more on natural resources for their livelihoods. How can we make sure that key stakeholders really are accountable for the meaningful participation of women in these sectors, particularly in climate change action and resilience building?
Okay, I will continue from where I stopped, because I think there is a link between what we require and what we expect to see at the end of the day. Our assessments are done at two levels. You know, there is a desk review that you do on your table, but we also emphasize the need for meaningful stakeholder consultation, which is done at different levels. So you could do it at a policy level where we encourage women's ministries, departments of gender to be involved in all those discussions, and CSOs which know a little bit more about the policy environment to engage and influence how the projects are designed. But it is also the intention for this meaningful consultation to be happening at a community level, where in recognition of the roles and responsibilities of women on the ground and communities on the ground, that they are able to influence the design of the projects. Once they are engaged and they can voice their concerns and issues and state how well they are versed with what is happening and how they can contribute, or where they see the perceived challenges are for them to achieve what they want to, then that is what fits into the Gender Action Plan. So we don't just look at the assessments that come to us, but we want to see the linkage between the assessment that is being done and how it is translated into actions. And I would go back to the need for data and targets and indicators. I mean, people come up with targets saying 50% and 20%, but we ask, how do you rationalize and how do you come up with that target? So we do ask rigorous questions to see whether whatever is being said on paper is actually, one, coming from the ground and is valid. So we ask for validation of the targets. 50% sounds good, but given the gender analysis that you have provided, is it feasible for us to see that? Is that what the women, the communities that we have identified as vulnerable are saying? When we look at the norms and cultures and societal pressures that are there, is it possible for us to be quoting that figure as our target? So there is a validation that we require through the stakeholder engagement, which I think is critical, because we can have those targets but not achieve it, but because we haven't planned it properly. So we do, and we do recognize that there is paucity of data, and I would love to see more data being gathered around this, but this is something that we think by doing this exercise that we are implanting in our partners to say, you need to have those data in place. And there are some projects which are looking at data at national level and how they can influence that. But for the projects, at least, we are trying to see whether they will have those targets and indicators. But the other one is budgets for implementation. We would require the gender action plans to be backed with budget. We don't necessarily go and say this is enough or not, but we do require that they allocate finances for the action plans that they develop. We will not accept a gender action plan without budgets. How is it going to be done if there is no budget assigned to it? So it can be a separate budget, it can be mainstreamed across the budget that they provide, but we need to see that. The other important element is the expertise, the gender expertise. We think, I mean, we have seen some projects which don't necessarily have good assessments and action plans, and we can already see that expertise has not been backing that exercise, or it has come too late in the game. They have already developed their concepts and funding proposals, and they thought, oh, GCF will require us to do a gender assessment, so they bring it late. But we see that, but we make sure that they understand that we need to have a gender expert or expertise, or institutions that are tasked to, are accountable for these kinds of results to be engaged. So in many of the assessments that we receive and action plans, we try to engage the partners to identify at different levels where the gender experts are, or where are the institutions that are accountable to provide this support in countries seen in this development process. So for me, the accountability system that we are trying to bring in is where I think is the potential for us to see change happen. And then besides this, the stakeholder engagement, I touched upon the grievance system that we are trying to set up under the environmental social management framework that we have. And we're trying to look at whether that also can be beefed up to see whether grievance, before it happens, how do they know about grievance systems? But once it happens, how can they tap into that to get redress mechanisms? So I think these are some of the basic things that I would like to speak to.
Thank you. It sounds basic, but it's not so basic, right? We often see that this is really where the gravel hits the road. To have the target setting and to holding ourselves accountable for measuring progress towards those targets, to invest financing, to secure implementation, and to have the dedicated expertise. I think these are very important accountability tools all. Thank you so much. Ms. Lee, we have mentioned briefly the national adaptation plans and the nationally determined contributions. And we know they're such important tools for countries to address climate change issues. But how can we ensure the meaningful participation in these processes? What would be your top recommendations to the policymakers, perhaps, in the room?
Yes, yeah. Okay, national adaptation plan and national determined contribution, we call NAP and NDCs, as the most important policy documents to fight climate change. The Paris Agreement 2015 requires gender mainstreaming in these policies. And in Vietnam, since mid-2019, the government launched the preparation process of this NAP and NDC to 2030. And as NGOs, we have a network of Vietnam NGOs on climate change, which consists of 125 local organizations. We just take this advantage and try to advocate strongly for gender mainstreaming in NAP and NDC. We believe that it is the best way to ensure gender issues fully addressed in these important policies is to participate in preparation process and consequently to implement them. So we met with government and signed the MOU to ensure that NGOs are fully participate in consultation process. We have been presenting statistics and data as evidence of contribution of women, of NGO led by women, of women workers in energy, waste, forest, agriculture, and water sectors. We help prepare gender analysis and organize workshops which were held with wide participations from governmental officials, women groups, women-led NGOs to discuss approaches, measures to integrate gender equality into NAP and NDCs. We also elaborate in specific inputs for programs and projects to be supported and to be led by women and participated by women. So within the framework of Empower Project of UN Women, our network of the NGO, Vietnamese NGO, developed 13 recommendations on gender mainstreaming and women empowerment that are sent to the government delegates and all representatives who are attending COP25. We know that COP25 will be organized next week in Montreal, so we hope that all these recommendations will reach there. So while preparation of policies, of this kind of policies, used to be employed, top-down approach, but with a bottom-up approach led by NGOs. Actually, in Vietnam, the government welcomes this approach very much. Yeah. So we hope that in this regard, women's role as agent for change has been recognized both at policy and practical level. Thank you.
Thank you so much for raising the absolutely critical issue of the participation of civil society and women-led organizations in preparing and implementing and being part of these processes and policies. And it's wonderful to hear that that is welcomed by governments, because we do know that that leads to better outcomes for everybody. So thank you so much for sharing that very positive experience from Vietnam. So Ms. Nairobi, then I want to go back to data and the Pacific roadmap on gender statistics, because I think it really is a model that could be of interest for the rest of the Asia-Pacific region. I know you did an implementation plan for this roadmap. How do you see it being able to help inform climate and disaster policies? How are you going to use it, and what would be your recommendations for really making sure that climate action and resilience building contribute also to gender equality?
Thank you, Anna. Probably just before I'll elaborate on how this framework will be supporting not only the Fijian government, but also with other governments in the Pacific, I wish to first reiterate, probably just to elaborate on what the Fijian government has in place, specifically with the National Women's Machinery. We have gone into providing a development of a strategic framework, which will be commencing in next year, which we were hoping that will be addressing. There are 7 critical areas that we have identified, and also one of them is not only looking at statistical data in terms of having gender statistics, but also looking at women and resilience and climate change. So in that note, the Department for Women is also in the process, also in the support with the New Zealand government, and also with UN Women in terms of conducting a country gender assessment. That's one of the initiatives that the National Women's Machinery will be proceeding in next year, and also one of the 7 chapters that we have identified, and one of them is looking at gender and environment. And critically, this is one of the critical areas, which is why we would like to do this country gender assessment, which is really a critical component for us in Fiji, and specifically to be able to know the status of women across all levels of sectors in development areas, and also looking at the gaps, what are the gaps are, and also one of the initiatives that we also have as well, apart from the country gender assessment, which is going to commence in next year, is we have planned as part of our gender mainstreaming approach is the institutional capacity development. And this is basically, like my fellow colleagues from other countries, that this is one of the areas that we've had gender focal officers in across government. We've been doing trainings in terms of how can they identify gender issues. So specifically from this approach that we're doing right now, we'll be able to build that trust and the relationship, and also the partnership with our relevant agencies. So the initiative right now that we're doing is that we're identifying, to start off with a few of our agencies in government, with the priorities of women, economic empowerment, and violence against women, and which we've identified 7 agencies who we will be working together with, and we're grateful that we have our NGO counterpart that will be also supporting the National Women's Machinery to be able to institutionalize. It's not only that we get to train them, but they get to gender analyze their own programs, their own policies that are in place. So really we are trying to transit that gender lenses that we have and be able to capacity build these government agencies, officials. And this is one of the areas that we critically, and we're looking forward to work with. And also we're in the process right now in collaboration with ADB and the Ministry of Economy. We're grateful that we are working in terms of one of our pilot agencies that we will be providing gender responsive budgeting, and how are they able to gender analyze their own programs, their own policies. So in that way, we're also having that same concept, and also doing the same with our Department of Environment. We have our National Disaster Management Office and other climate change division within government, which will be able to provide that capacity, institutionalize that gender analytical in terms of providing, to be able for them to understand with us, in terms of the issues that women and girls face when it comes to climate change.
Yeah. Wonderful. Really great to see you're doing a country gender assessment, and to have a dedicated chapter on gender and environment. I don't think that's always the case, so that's really good. And also highlighting the importance of the institutional capacity building, not only individuals, but really embedding it and institutionalizing it is so critical. So the last question before I hand over to the audience for any questions and comments. Mr. Khan, now you have been a part of the UNFCCC process for some time. What do you see as the key actions for Bangladesh, but perhaps also for other countries, on how we can accelerate efforts to ensure that environmental conservation and resilience building are truly gender responsive? Mr. Khan.
Thank you, Anna. Before directly responding to your question, I want to focus on one cultural barrier which works against women empowerment. We know in South Asian culture, particularly overall in Asian culture, we have the son preference culture. And the interesting thing is that even mothers prefer sons over daughters. This is something contradictory. Daughters like parents much more. This is a reality I can vouch for. This is a fact, like geometric axiom. But still, why? Because to me, because of women living under centuries of crude patriarchalism, they have been condemned to think like men. So we need to get them out. And for that, we need to empower. Capacity building is a key issue. And I think we need to bring in role models, not from the English-educated elite lady communities living in the capital city, but from the downtrodden traditional societies. We have lots of icons in Bangladesh and in all countries. That icon ladies, girls from the downtrodden traditional societies, we need to bring them in, because for empowering them, when the traditional women believing in those traditional age-old cultures see their sister coming out and talking different languages, then they believe her, will believe her more than a very well-articulate English-educated lady. They also, those icons also nowadays speak English. So I think UNFCCC process should promote more women delegates from those downtrodden communities. This is one. Then we need to have more gender focal points established at the national level and linked to the global processes, including at the UNFCCC. And another thing is, again, I take women as better husbands than the so-called husbands like Mizan sitting before you. Because I'm not a native English speaker, but there are quite a number of delegates here who are native English speaker. The literal meaning of husband is caretaker. And I can vouch again for this reality, for this fact, that women are better husbands. I have seen it starting from my own family, extended family, down to the success of Grameen Banks and BRAC, the largest NGO in Bangladesh. Now, Dr. Sar Fazl Hassan Abed or Dr. Mohammad Yunus are today where they are only thanks to the contribution of the rural women. Thanks to their honesty, and they have paid back 100% of the little money that they have got, but when that little money was given to the husbands, they smoked and drank away that money. So husbands, women are better husbands, I accept. And I have written about that in the media, in our English and Bangla media about that. Now, coming to the recommendations, for example, can we think of a radical kind of suggestion to create a Grameen Bank-like credit, microcredit, grant-based and microcredit-like agency, which will give adaptation finance directly to women entrepreneurs, poor women entrepreneurs, little money. Because nowadays, I am primarily a climate finance negotiator. And research has shown that only 10% of the money goes to the community under whose name that whole project is developed. And now out of that 10%, I'm not sure how much, 1 or 2% even doesn't go to the women communities at the village rural level. So we need to track adaptation finance delivery to the communities, because economic empowerment is the key. Yesterday we have seen that the civil society statement that government should compensate the women's unpaid home care. I have another suggestion, added suggestion, because where the governments will get money from? Government's money is our pockets money. They tax our salaries, our incomes, and the governments run like that. So I will recommend another little cut from the husband's salary, and that credit back, that a small share, to the wife's accounts, so that together with the government subsidy, the husband's little tax going to the women's wife's accounts can empower her a little. This is another suggestion. And also, I think decarbonization of fossil will empower women, because this fossil era is based on the Texan culture, It's a men's affair, it's totally centralized, but decentralized energy production and use mainly relate to the women. So I think this decarbonization will greatly empower, and promotion of renewable energy, this is another area. And finally, I have, these are I think, mostly my recommendations at the national and global levels. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Mr. Khan. And I think your point on really reaching the rural women and leveraging their skills, their knowledge, their expertise, and that interventions and the benefits of interventions have to reach local communities is well noted. So we have come almost to the end of our discussion. I do want to open up the floor to see if we have any distinguished delegates who would like to make an intervention. Yes, the government of Japan.
Okay, thank you for this opportunity to comment. Let me briefly introduce some measures taken in Japan, especially on the disaster risk reduction to build back better the disaster-resilient societies. In the aftermath of the Great East Japan earthquake and tsunami of March 2011, we witnessed the problem that women were unable to participate fully in decision-making processes of disaster risk management, and insufficient attention was paid to the differing needs of women and men in emergency response and reconstruction processes. When a disaster occurs, the challenges that exist under normal circumstances become even more pronounced, such as the gender-based violence. So it is fundamental importance for effective disaster risk management and recovery that measures derived from gender equal perspective are implemented before disaster occur. It is vital to take into account the different ways in which women and men are impacted by disasters and to employ a gender equal perspective in pre-disaster preparation, management of evacuation centers, and economically and socially support for those affected by disaster. Japan recognizes that women play key roles in climate change and all phases of disaster risk management, including prevention, emergency response, recovery, and reconstruction. Our disaster risk management policy, therefore, comprises measures devised from a gender equal perspective. Japan is encouraging disaster risk reduction initiatives by the local governments and local women and residents. In addition to the basic plans for gender equality, the basic disaster management plan incorporated new content, which is aimed primarily at giving due attention to the gender perspective. Japan promotes women's participation in government policy decision-making processes at national and local levels in actual disaster management, considering the differences in women and men's needs in the context of evacuation center management. And we also developed the national guidelines on disaster risk reduction with gender and diversity perspective. So Japan will continue improving its climate change and disaster risk management and recovery and reconstruction measures devised from a gender equal perspective, taking into account international commitments such as the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction and SDGs. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much from the distinguished delegate from Japan. I see the Minister from Myanmar, Excellency.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I'm Union Minister for Social Welfare and Disaster Management. And I would like to share some experience, and I would like to give some comments. And in relation to the area of climate action and resilient building, Myanmar formulated the Myanmar Action Plan on Disaster Risk Reduction and National Strategy Plan on Social Protection, and also working together with the development partners. And we have also formed the Social Protection and Disaster Management Sector Coordination Unit, which is one of the sector coordination units under the development assistance. Myanmar is experiencing shock responsive social protection. Let's say we are now implementing the maternal and child cash transfer program and social pension as a regular cash transfer program under 8 flagship programs of social protection. During the time of disaster, we provided additional cash transfer to those groups with, especially for pregnant women and lactating mothers for more resilient. But we also should change our traditional outlook of women and girls as aid recipients to the community leaders in terms of protecting our environment and reducing the impacts of climate change. With regard to the gender equality for the women and girls in the domain of environmental conservation, climate action, and resilience building, women and girls have played a transformative role for bringing the societal awareness and cooperation in climate action. So we need to provide a space for them to be able to fully exercise their agencies in bringing climate and disaster resilient communities. And we also need to listen to their voices. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much from the distinguished delegate from Myanmar. I believe, Indonesia. Ma'am?
Thank you very much, Chair, for giving me the floor. And thank you very much for all the panelists for sharing their important initiatives. Allow me to share what we have done also in Indonesia. There are 4 points that I would like to share. Firstly, with regard to address the needs of women reproductive health in disaster area as a result of climate change, Ministry of Women Empowerment and Child Protection, together with the Ministry of Health, have provided minimum initial service package from the emergency phase to the rehabilitation phase. These packages are targeted mostly to pregnant women and women in need. Apart from that, we also provided trauma healing centers to address the needs of women and children victims of violence, usually in the camp area. This in cooperation with the Ministry of Social Affairs and CSOs. We also provide basic needs to women and children during the emergency phase. The second one, UNDP Regional, in collaboration with Ministry of Environment and Forestry in Indonesia, has conducted a mapping of the needs and livelihood of the people with disability, looking at the impact of the climate change on the livelihood and how they also adapted to it. Last month, we just completed ethnographic assessment in Bali, West Nusa Tenggara, and East Nusa Tenggara provinces in order to collect the data of the people with disability. They collaborated very closely with Indonesian Association of Women with Disabilities. Thirdly, gender mainstreaming is also integrated in related government institutions concerned with climate change, such as National Agency on the Handling of Disaster, Climate Change Council, and the Ministry of Environment and Forestry, so that their policies and programs would be gender responsive. Fourthly, with regard on the participation of women organizations, every year national women organizations take part in planting 1 million trees, as well as this movement is also carried out at the local women organization in order to conserve and preserve the environment. Thank you.
Thank you to the distinguished delegate from Indonesia. I see Bhutan. Ma'am.
Thank you, Madam Moderator, and all the panelists for your very good presentation. Bhutan would also like to share that we are implementing the Gender Nationally Determined Contributions Project, NDC, with the UNDP and the National Environment Commission. And this is the first time that the Environment Commission and the National Commission for Women and Children are actually collaborating. Till now, we've not had gender-responsive climate actions, but now we are set into action for that. The project aims to achieve the transformational change through the implementation of the gender-responsive nationally determined contributions of the country. It is also focused towards using the NDC implementation as a mechanism to scale up the investments in the gender-responsive climate actions. The project is also aimed towards achieving the regulatory decisions, making investments in the climate-friendly initiatives and diversified initiatives, including green energy mix, which will result into carbon-neutral development. At the moment, Bhutan is one of the countries that is carbon negative, so we aim to stay that way. So the project is envisaged to contribute towards the following outputs: integrated governance enhanced to deliver NDC outcomes. So it also means enhancement of collaboration between all the relevant stakeholders, evidence-based design and planning of mitigation actions delivered, capacities developed to design climate-friendly investment opportunities, addressing investor risk, and blend and catalyzing climate finance and enabling environment enhanced for private sector engagement. A gender NDC analysis study was carried out in 3 NDC priority sectors: agriculture, waste, and energy. And just to share the findings from the study in these 3 sectors. So these are some of the key findings. Gender issues are not recognized as relevant for climate change action in general or within the NDC sectors of agriculture, energy, and waste, mainly because of the lack of awareness. Then the lack of data and information on gender, climate, and climate change in Bhutan, that was also made obvious through the study. The mainstreaming of gender issues in climate policy and action needs institutional mandate, capacity, and tools. So these were some of the findings. Despite numerous legal and policy frameworks, the integration of gender issues into these sectors is absent or very limited. Women are an agent of change, and they can take an active role in education and awareness raising, community organization, adoption of renewable energy technologies, recycling, and composting. Women's leadership and meaningful involvement and participation is limited. Gender equity and balance are lacking in many organizations and institutions. Then about half of the population that were surveyed, they strongly agreed that it increases women's workload more than men's when it's climate change related issues. Then 83.24% reported that climate change affects the natural resources that they depend on for their livelihood. So that awareness is at least there. Then relatively a higher proportion of females are unprepared than males to face climate change-induced shocks. The findings also show that there is an increase in work burden for women and children in their communities because of the out-migration of people from their communities as a result of climate change. So these were just some of the first findings that we had. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, ma'am, for sharing those helpful updates. I don't see any, yes, Mongolia, distinguished delegate from Mongolia.
Thank you, Madam Moderator, and thank you, dear panelists, for very informative and very useful information presentations. Mongolia is a landlocked country, and maybe compared to Fiji and Indonesia, all those countries exposed to the sea, to the forces of the sea and oceans, maybe we're lucky to be landlocked. But nonetheless, we face the threat and the danger of desertification because Mongolia is a very dry country, big territory, small population. And we are part also of Asian Development Bank's big regional project, which aims at building resilience to climate change effects in 3 countries, Fiji, Laos, and Mongolia. So the work is starting. I have questions and maybe one proposal. 2 questions. What is the best strategy you have sort of identified in your work to develop national capacity for gender impact assessment and gender-sensitive policy planning in climate change and disaster risk management area? National capacity, because typically, especially disaster risk management agencies are military in our country. And the military, no matter how well they understand the need to be gender responsive, they are removed from that theme, you know, rather far. So they can't find ways and means of addressing that in a meaningful way, in a knowledgeable way. So second, is there any regional knowledge hub and perhaps an institutional, a training research institution mechanism supporting South cooperation in our area. And my proposal, suggestion is maybe it will come in handy, maybe not. Last year, late 2018, we had Asia-Pacific Ministerial Conference on Disaster Risk Management in our country, in Ulaanbaatar. And we were doing research and preparing. I was doing some presentation. And when I went to the UNFCCC website's page on gender aspects of activities that fall under the UNFCCC, it was very informative. It was huge. It was so huge. And the themes ranged as far as related to gender, from women's property rights up to, I don't know, artificial intelligence. So from that point of view, it was rather unmanageable and not so helpful. So having a model strategy that countries could use and reflect their own national specifics could be very helpful for those military and paramilitary DRM agencies and guidelines, model ones. So if we could think about that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, ma'am, from Mongolia. In the interest of time, I know some of you would like to go to some of the side events that will start very soon, if not already, including one also on climate change for those of you who still have more appetite. Perhaps we can, since I don't see any other member states, give statements to the NGO I know we have from the CSO Steering Committee, and then I'll hand for some final reflections from the panel, if that's okay. So please, representatives from the CSO Steering Committee, your statement.
Hello. Thank you for the opportunity. I'm Erimeta Parao from the Republic of Kiribati, one of the first Pacific Island countries to disappear from the earth if nothing is done to stop the seas from rising. The climate crisis is caused by an economic system that prioritizes profit and wealth over human and environmental well-being. It is therefore extremely important for governments to recognize and address the climate emergency as a climate crisis and climate breakdown, and to take urgent action for immediate change. Initiate measures for a just and equitable transition of the economy with an intersectional gender-responsive approach. Acknowledge traditional and indigenous knowledge, which includes sustainable practices and enables food sovereignty. Recognize, respect, and protect the rights to land, territories, and natural resources, including rights to self-determination. All processes to have meaningful participation and free, prior, and informed consent that are also continuous. Commit to climate finance and recognize and incorporate the principles of common but differentiated responsibilities, especially when it comes to resourcing climate action. At the moment, the Green Climate Fund is inaccessible for grassroots women who are facing the impacts right now. What can be done about that? We'll leave that for you to consider. Commit to a zero carbon economy, reaffirming the UN Secretary General's call for an immediate global ban on any coal plants and mines. We urge and call on the states to phase out the use of coal, rule out false solutions such as nuclear power, banks to divest from fossil fuels, legislative branches to pass a zero carbon bill, as New Zealand has, and judiciary to support climate litigation. Our identity, our survival, and our young people's future is at stake here. And you cannot have gender equality on a dead planet. In conclusion, let me bestow on you all the Kiribati traditional blessings of Te Maori, Te Roi, and Te Tapomoa, health, peace, and prosperity. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much from the CSO Steering Committee representative for those remarks and for the question as well. I do see one more comment. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you for the opportunity. We'd like to share the findings from Leveraging Climate Finance for Gender Equality and Poverty Reduction, a study conducted by C4, the Center for International Forestry Research, and UNDP, where we assess 5 financial mechanisms in Indonesia that allocating climate-related funds to sub-national levels, including villages. Climate finance is an enabling tool for empowering women. Indonesia is making steps in the right directions. Its regulatory framework is favorable for gender mainstreaming, yet this hasn't been fully put in practice. The Village Fund, for example, the largest transfer mechanism in the world that reaches the village level, relies on village forum to decide on how to manage and utilize the funds. Although there are laws that require gender equity in village governance, in practice, it is the village head and the prevailing social norms that decide how women enter into the decision-making processes. Other mechanisms, the forestry loans, has no regulations to stop women from getting credits. However, the designs, the requirement to receive the loans, access to information, and access to farmer groups are not favorable to women. The investments focus on establishing plantation and delaying timber harvesting, but women are not primarily engaged in these kinds of activities, and loans don't provide assistance to ensuring women to catch up. We've also learned that focusing on poverty reduction doesn't always translate to advancing gender equality. Our data shows that fund distribution that solely relies on poverty indicators may miss areas with high gender inequalities. Therefore, we would suggest that we would need a better coordination to strengthen the capacity of village heads and those who have access to power and can influence the decision-making processes to mainstream gender, strengthening the women groups for more access to information and control over resources, to voice their concern in meaningful participation and translate to empowerment, and in the long term, aiming for transformative change. Gender mainstreaming comes with a cost. However, without it, there will be other costs that we often don't calculate. It's the cost of inequities and marginalization in the society. By excluding women, the poor, and marginalized groups, including the indigenous populations. We also need to strengthen the existing gender-responsive climate budget tagging, carrying out the gender action plans on implementation of climate change mitigation and adaptation, establish a stronger partnership with local governments, CSO researchers, and communities, rigorous monitoring, evaluation, and learning processes, including improving the indicators, and promote an outcome-based allocation of the reward system to motivate good performance and innovations. The price of inequities is high, therefore inequalities across genders result in economic inefficiencies with macroeconomic repercussions. There's a need to invest in better implementation strategies and inclusive economic activities in climate finance, and to mainstream gender in the conceptualization, design, implementation, monitoring, evaluation, and learning cycle of the climate finance. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for those remarks. So we are just in the process of wrapping up. I would like to turn back very briefly for perhaps some of the specific burning questions. We won't be able to answer all of them in just a couple of minutes, but maybe something on the national capacity, the question from Mongolia, and if there are model strategies that could be used in that regard. There was a question on regional knowledge, hub and knowledge sharing. I'm sure our colleagues in the Regional Commission are doing work also on that. And finally, the issue on financing and how to make sure that these investments can reach women's groups also at the community level. Maybe just a few. If Mr. Khan, you would like to start us off with the
capacity
question for
building.
national.
Yeah, thank you very much. Just last year, we have a book where I am the lead author on capacity building published by Routledge from London. In fact, on climate change, that was. Your question is absolutely important because the time has come for capacity building. And what kind of capacities we needed? I can synthesize 3 types of capacity building is needed for addressing climate change. For example, understanding the climate impacts in all its dimensions and the consequent vulnerabilities, their assessments, modeling, and based on this knowledge and expertise, you need to develop national plans, strategies, and policies. These 2, and the third one relates to both. Developing capacity at for global negotiations, because negotiations by country level is a reflection of their national interests. That is why we as negotiators have to understand the international process well so that we can promote Bangladesh interests or Mongolian interests. So broadly, these 3 types of capacities. Now the traditional model of capacity building did not work at all because we had for 4 decades, we had this flying in and flying out consultancy-based model of capacity building, which is focused on short-term 2-year projects, for example, and foreign consultancy-led, and just 1 or 2 workshops, and they have flown out. That didn't build capacity, because whole this climate change and engendering process of development is very, very knowledge-intensive. So we need not just 1 workshop, series of workshops, semester-based training, and also degree programs. That is the reason we have established at the LDCs, we have established the LDC Universities Consortium on Climate Change. And this LUCC, we call LUCCC, is a LDC-wide project, together with a project LifeAir, we call, on adaptation, and one on renewable energy. But this LUCC, I lead this process. This LUCC brings together all the universities, because universities, each, even a poorest country, a small country, has got at least 1 university. And that university is the most sustainable institutions. Emperors, governments come and go, but universities remain. So universities should be the central hub. Government must function as the coordinator, but not as the capacity breeder. Universities is the sustainable capacity breeder, sustainable capacity supplier. And the development partners should fund now more universities where foreign expertise must help, but they must step back and take the back seat, where national expertise should be allowed to lead the process. Then only capacity will be built and sustained. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Khan. And finally, on the financing?
But I would like to jump in on this one.
Of course.
I mean, capacity building is important, but I think without accountability for that capacity development, I don't think it will go anywhere. Absolutely. You have to train to be able to say you are accountable for the results in these areas. We can't go on investing in trainings, but not have anybody being held accountable for not delivering. And I think that's important. I will not attempt to respond to the issue that was raised, but on the financing directly to women. But in the projects, what we will try to strengthen is on how the stakeholder engagement brings in the relevant people, the relevant stakeholders together to be developing the action plans that are required. We will strengthen that. We will make sure that we'll try to make sure, because we don't directly implement, but we do approve the funding proposals. We will try to make sure that stakeholders, as they exist, are consulted, and that we can get to hear how that has been incorporated in the action plans that we receive. So we do ask in the stakeholder plans, how many women? That's important, but then what did those women say, and what are those actions that you have included in the action plans? I would not pretend that we are succeeding, but I think the message that we are consistently sending is that we need those consultations to be the basis for identifying the interventions that are included in the action plan.
Thank you so much for that response. I think we have now come to the end of the session, and all that is left for me is to say a huge thank you to our diverse, experienced, and very dynamic group of panelists this afternoon. Can we give them a big round of applause, please? Thank you so much for sharing all your experiences, for highlighting the importance of capacity and accountability, the importance of data, the importance of coordination mechanisms, the importance of financing and measuring our progress, and of course, last but not least, the importance of also investing in women's economic empowerment in these sectors as a key tool for effectiveness and sustainability. So with that, thank you so much, and I will hand back over to the session chair. Thank you.
On indicators, which will lead on indicators of the year. You're absolutely right. Millions of dollars have been spent on.
Thank you, Anna, and thank you, the panelists, for an interesting and informative panel discussion. We have now reached the end of the time allotted for this agenda item, but we still have another agenda item to go through before we wrap up for today, and that's agenda item 4 on other matters. Are there any delegates who wish to intervene under this agenda item? No? There is civil society.
I think if nobody else is saying anything, we as civil society wish to express our deep thanks and gratitude to you, Madam Chair, for your support all throughout this process, for our presence and our voice. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Well, if there are no other matters, this concludes today's agenda item. I thank all delegates for your thoughtful and constructive contributions to the proceedings, and we've discussed a wealth of issues during the course of today, both governmental delegations and also the CSO Steering Committee. I thank you all for your contribution, and also to the Secretariat. Thank you very much for the support during the day, and I thank you all for your active participation. The conference is now adjourned, and we will reconvene tomorrow at 2:30 p.m., where we'll take up agenda item 5 on the adoption of the outcome document and report of the conference. Meeting is adjourned.
Thank you, Chair. And just to note, you're cordially invited to a number of side events this evening. I think they're starting pretty much now. Borderless Youth Forum Showcase, Innovation and Gender Justice, Meeting Room A. Champions for Change, Women Fighting for Climate Action in the Theatre. Generation Equality Forum Towards a Global Pact for Gender Equality, Meeting Room H. Then tomorrow morning, a series of side events beginning at 10:30. Time is now, Partnerships and Innovation, Financing to Close the Gender Gap, Conference Room 2. Then lunchtime, starting at 12:30, we have side events Transforming the Future of Work for Gender Equality, Conference Room 3. Building Feminist Movement, Achieving Beijing Accountability, Feminist Participatory Action Research, Meeting Room H, Girls, Count Girls' Rights and Gender Data in Asia Pacific, in the Theatre, Unlocking Opportunities for Empowerment Through Gender-Sensitive Infrastructure, Meeting Room A. And last but not least, 25 years after Beijing, Promising Practices and Successful Measures in Enhancing Safe Migration for Women Workers in ASEAN in the public foyer. Thank you, and a good evening to all.
Yang muda-muda nih.